Hey guys, it's Lord of the Pogs. If you're wondering about the shirt, it's Transylvania Survival Kit. Today we're going to talk about giants. Giants have been a part of pop culture going as far back as Jack and the Beanstalk. They're in books and movies, and they're even in popular music. The oldest legends often speak of huge men and women who were much bigger and taller in size than humans and presented themselves as reclusive creatures, sometimes fiercely fighting or devouring humans. These legends are not only the realm of storybooks, but also of most prehistoric and religious texts. Goliath of the David and Goliath story is probably the most well-known of these. The story of David and Goliath is found in the second book of Samuel. Other parts of the Bible mention mysterious beings called Nephilim. These are usually described as being giants, but some scholars refer to them as fallen angels or the descendants of Cain. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. In Greek mythology, Hercules is said to have fought the Titans, but that's a little bit different. Giants are generally thought of as being similar to humans in appearance, and in mythology a Titan is a type of god, so it's not really the same thing. The only giant Hercules is said to have fought was Antaeus as part of his 11th labor. So giants appear in ancient history texts, but where is the tangible evidence? Bones excavated near Lucerne, France in 1577 were said to be the remains of a giant that was alive during the time of Noah. Fossilized leg bones and teeth excavated near Albany, New York in 1705 were said to be the remains of a Nephilim who perished in Noah's flood. Both of these have since been positively identified as mammoth skeletons. The Cardiff giant was a petrified humanoid being excavated near Cardiff, New York in 1869 by engineers digging a well. It is currently on display at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Paleontologists who inspected the Cardiff giant found that it was made of gypsum, which is used to make plaster, drywall, and chalk, and noted that if it had been buried more than a few years, it wouldn't have fresh tool marks, which it did. Soon after this, tobacco farmer George Hull confessed to having built and deliberately buried the statue. So is this lack of tangible evidence for the existence of giants itself proof that giants never existed? No, it's not. It's important to remember that the first dinosaur bones weren't discovered until 1819, and they weren't positively attributed to the study of dinosaurs until 1824. So no, lack of tangible evidence for the existence of giants itself is not proof that giants never existed. So let's assume that giants did exist. What would it be like if you encountered one? What would a giant look like? Probably not the way you think, and definitely not the way they're portrayed in popular media. There have been larger than average humans. Robert Wadlow is confirmed by the Guinness Book of World Records as the tallest verified human in recorded history, standing at 8 feet 11 inches. He died in 1940. The tallest woman in recorded history, verified by the Guinness Book of World Records, was Zhang Junlian, standing at 8 feet 2 inches. She died in 1982. But giants are generally thought of as being substantially larger than humans, and maybe of a different species. Moving forward, we're going to assume that a standard giant stands 50 feet tall. That's about 10 times taller than the average human. The first thing we need to talk about is the square cube law. The square cube law states that as something grows, it doesn't need to be a living thing. It could be a rock or a bottle of water or anything, but as something grows, its surface area increases by a square, and its internal volume increases by a cube. So a giant standing 10 times taller than the average human, its surface area, its skin, if you will, would increase by 100 times, and its internal volume would increase by 1,000 times. If a standard 5-foot human weighs 110 pounds, a giant standing 50 feet tall would weigh over 120,000 pounds. Human bones can support 6,000 pounds. Some animals have different kinds of bones. Insects have exoskeletons, birds have hollow bones, and sharks have skeletons made out of cartilage. But bones are bones, and since a giant is assumed to be a humanoid creature, we'll assume that a giant has humanoid bones. So a giant's bone structure would be able to support up to 60,000 pounds. This means that a giant standing at 50 feet would literally be crushed under its own weight. That's not even scientific, it's just mathematical evidence that giants physically can't exist. But what would it take for a giant to be able to exist? Its bones would need to be made out of a material that's at least twice as strong as human bones. Most reported fossilized giant remains have been positively identified as a type of extinct mammal, like mammoths or giant apes, but others have been unverified. However, if a giant skeleton were made of a material different from animal bones the way we know them, then any fossilized remains identified as animal bones can be positively not attributed to giants. The other possibility is a giant skeleton would be made out of the same material as animal bones, but they would have to be much larger to support the weight. Larger bones themselves would weigh more, which would mean there was more weight that would need to be supported. If every bone in a giant skeleton were twice as big as a human bone to scale, it would be about 30% of a giant's body weight. That would add an additional 18,000 pounds, and that additional weight would need to be supported by extra muscle mass, which itself would add additional weight. So imagine a human twice as wide as a normal person and ripped like Arnold Schwarzenegger on steroids, almost like an extra large version of the Incredible Hulk. Then imagine that person being 50 feet tall. That's probably the way a giant would appear if you encountered one, and it's not even a particularly well-built giant. It's just normal as far as giants go. The Mr. Universe of giants would be substantially larger, maybe even to the point of limited mobility in its limbs. We're not going to go that far into it, but it is worth noting that despite the increased muscle mass, there would actually be a decrease in the strength to weight ratio, and a giant's heart rate would be quite a bit lower as well. A standard human heart rate is 80 beats per minute, and a giant standing at 50 feet would likely experience a heart rate less than 20 beats per minute. So a giant standing at 50 feet would probably get worn out more easily, experiencing lightheadedness, dizziness, fatigue, and shortness of breath. Everything else being equal, a 25-year-old giant would probably have the physical stamina of a 50-year-old man. One way around this problem would be to assume that a giant standing at 50 feet tall had the same mass as a human standing 5 feet tall. This would mean that being 10 times larger, the density of the mass would be 10 times less. A giant standing at 50 feet would have a density of about 6 pounds per cubic foot. I know those numbers don't mean anything, so let's put it into perspective. Imagine walking into the wind, against the wind on a windy day. We've all done that. To the giant in this scenario, it would feel like the wind was blowing 10 times harder. Despite these assumptions, a giant standing 50 feet with the same mass as a regular human would probably still experience a lower heart rate and lower blood pressure. Standing at 50 feet tall, a giant's resonant cavity in their throat would become 10 times larger than a normal human, causing the pitch of their voice to go down by a factor of 10. Humans can hear sound between 20 Hz and 20 kHz. A normal human speaking voice is between 200 and 5,000 Hz, so a giant's speaking voice would be between 20 and 500 Hz, barely audible to humans. Imagine a dog whistle that you can barely hear, but on the low end as a deep, bassy sound. If you've experienced any sort of hearing loss, or if your hearing isn't that great, you might not be able to hear a giant speak at all. So what would a giant's diet look like? Arguably, it would probably be very similar to a human's. A normal person's diet is about 2,000 calories a day. If a giant weighed 150,000 pounds, then its calorie intake needs would probably be about 2.7 million calories. A normal human body contains about 125,000 calories, so if we stick with the popular culture depiction that giants eat humans, then a giant would need to eat about 20 people a day to maintain that 2.7 million calorie intake need. But if we assume that a giant's diet is similar to a human's but on a much larger scale. Then on top of drinking 1,000 gallons of water a day, here's what a giant's diet would look like. Breakfast: 3,000 eggs, 1,500 bananas, 85 gallons of coffee. Morning snack: 1,200 apples. Lunch: 2,500 cheeseburgers and a Diet Coke. Afternoon snack: 1,000 cucumbers and 19 gallons of hummus. Dinner: 4,500 tacos. Dessert: 72 gallons of ice cream. Going back a minute, it is worth noting that Robert Ladlow, confirmed by the Guinness Book of World Records as the tallest verified human in world history, himself required leg braces and walked with a cane by the time he was a teenager because his legs were unable to support his full body weight on their own. He died when he was just 22 years old due to an infection he developed in his legs related to this weight issue. He was only 30% taller than an average human. A giant standing at 50 feet would be over 700% taller than an average human. So whatever issues Robert Wadlow faced related to his size, a giant would probably experience 20 times more. Obviously, this is all speculation. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, I don't claim to be. These are all conclusions that I've come to doing my own research into the subject matter. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think a giant would be like if you encountered one? Please let me know down in the comments. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that little bell in the corner to get notifications on more videos like this one.